Second hand in a row, opened by Kenneth Smarin, this time from the hijack. Raised to 65,000. Timofeyev in the small blind.
Rebet coming.
Raises to 210,000. Abdulatif has folded the big blind. And these two going to go to a flop again. Smarin wants to see what Timofeyev's playing. 1.4 million behind. Smarin's going to call the 3-bet, play the flop in position. The flop is 9-8 deuce.
I don't really think Timofeyev has to have a hand to 3-bet out of the small blind. I think Smarin's going to be opening fairly wide. From just about any position, as long as it's not under the gun. Even still, we're 7-handed. He's got all the chips.
Continuation bet of 225,000. Smarin calls. So this hand is going to the turn. That turn card is the 4 of hearts.
Can't imagine that's going to affect too much. 30,000?
Correct. It's 125 grand up top, which is a phenomenal prize in an $11 buy-in tournament.
It's just going to take you several days to win it.
Timofeyev does not fire another barrel on the turn, checks the action to the chip leader.
So these guys are kind of going to war, right, with some not so great hands. And this is especially relevant for Timofeyev because he started as the effective stack. We're close to the official final table of 6 players, and he's really putting a lot on the line with Jack-7 out of position. Now, pre-flop, I think it's pretty important that he knows Smarin is folding a lot if he's going to make this 3-bet.
So that means Smarin has to be opening with a lot of hands that he'd feel reasonable opening with, but really comfortable folding. Hands like a 6, a 7, King 5 suited, stuff like that where you think, I'm dominant, it's not worth it, as opposed to more of the suited connector type hands like this, which we really think he's going to call when he's got as many chips as he does and being in position.
So this indicates to us that Smarin has been very active, at least if Timofeyev's been paying attention, which we assume he has.
He might be playing Candy Crush on his phone. And you're like,
he might be, that's true.
Jack-7 suited, this is the hand I always 3-bet.
Yeah, this is my game theory hand that I 3-bet. Yeah, it works. Anyway, so this flop is not so good for Timofeyev. It's not terrible. At least he flopped a gut shot. Continuing makes sense.
Yeah.
Smarin can't really do anything but call on this flop. It seems like the only choice here. The most interesting thing is the turn play by Smarin. This is an interesting spot where we think it's pretty close, pretty marginal.
I mean, it's a really close spot. So first of all, Timofeyev is giving up.
Yeah, he's folding for sure.
He's got a little bit more than a pot-sized bet left. Like, we're done if we're Timofeyev. You don't want to, there's no reason to risk your whole stack right here. It's okay to, I guess, continue, but clearly that's not his decision. He's not check raising all in, we don't think. We think he's just check folding. Now, Smarin has a really tough spot, like Grant's saying. He could bet and deny the equity, because we assume as Smarin we're usually ahead here, right?
Right,
So
usually.
Usually, and this is part of the equation, but we could deny the equity of that Mozgov?
No,
Timofeyev.
You keep thinking Timofey Mozgov.
You know, he's a famous guy.
Yeah.
If Timofeyev has a hand like ace queen, ace king, these are hands he very reasonably could have.
Yeah.
Right? Ace jack, king queen, whatever. Hands like that anyway. I don't know if he really is going to have king queen too often. But you can deny that equity by betting. The pot is really big and worth winning right now. But, and there is a but.
But the problem is, sometimes Timofeyev might have an overpair. He might play an overpair this way and decide to check shove. Now, we don't know this as the poker guys. Smarin and Timofeyev have been playing together for a while, we assume. Smarin must assume when he checks back that Timofeyev has some check shoves in him,
right,
because he doesn't want to get shoved on with an 8 here. It has value, but it's not really a great hand to go with on the turn when a guy's going to risk his tournament at this stage.
The other thing you're trying to balance as Smarin is not just, am I going to get check shoved on, which does suck, and we may have to fold. We'll have to strongly consider folding for sure. But also, is it better to win the pot right now or check and induce bluffs or get value on the river? Because we got to believe if we bet right now, worse hands that aren't bluffs are going to fold, almost always.
So it's really just entirely for protection, and it almost doesn't matter what our hand is if we decide to bet now as Smarin.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah, so that's what we have to weigh. Smarin decides, I'm going to bluff catch the river or figure out what's going on in the river. I don't want to get check shoved on, so it's time to check. Now, something to look for as the audience and think about is, when these guys play the turn this way, do you think either of them could have a flush draw?
Yeah, could they have flush draws or draws of any kind? Before we get to the next street in action, we want to tell you about the guys who make this video possible, 888 Poker.
888 Poker not only make this video possible, they make it possible for you to play in the World Series of Poker main event for as little as 1 cent. It's the only place you can qualify online. $12,500 package is waiting for you, and there's tons of ways to qualify, including the 1 cent way.
I mean, 1 cent is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Use the link in the description or use the code POKERGUYS for first-time depositors. If you deposit $10, you get 20 more bucks in your account. I mean, come on.
Free money.
Free money.
Now back to the action.
Smarin checks behind. We get the jack of clubs on the river. So a few draws come in.
Yeah. Draws of all shapes and sizes. It just means this hand taking forever.
Yeah.
I guess we could just recap the action. This was 3-bet, remember? Timofeyev out of position, 3-bet out of the small blind to the late-ish position open from Smarin. He continued flop for just under half the pot. Queen 10. Clubs.
Did he just say you're all in?
He sure did.
Smarin shoves on Timofeyev. All in to call.
So it's not a snap call. He did not back himself into anything huge. So we're back to weighting our hand. Our hand ranges to stuff like 10-9s and 9-8s.
I mean, obviously, this is a decision for his tournament life. We can understand him thinking about it. But how much time has this hand in total taken off the clock?
It's a long hand, and the more I see him pained over this, maybe he really did have a big hand before the flop. You know, maybe he did have queens. He's in a really rough spot with 2 queens here. Smarin's repping the flush regardless of whatever he's got.
What hands is he checking turn, betting river with? He calls all in. And he gets to see whether he's good or not. Smarin tables 10-8.
Smarin who had the 10-8. Timofeyev has to have the winner there.
Wow. So we think these are 2 really great plays on the river. We think both of these guys deserve a lot of credit for how they played the hand. And it's really interesting because this is like modern poker at its best. All the ranges are a little different than you'd expect. It's pretty cool.
It's really, really cool. So we'll start with Timofeyev. He bets, what, 300 and change?
375, I believe.
So a little more than change.
Into 935. It's a small bet. And we think that's kind of transparent. And we think Timofeyev knows it's transparent. We also think Smerin knows it's transparent.
But the reason why Timofeyev is doing it is he's trying to get called by a hand just like Smerin has. He's trying to get called by 8s and 9s and maybe pocket 7s, pocket 6s, hands like that can call for this amount where we're not polarized, right?
Right. He's trying to do that, and that usually works against a worse player. Those guys are going to call a lot of the time.
Right.
But Smerin seems like a pretty smart guy, and Smerin sniffs it out, and he thinks, and we have to believe the sizing is a huge factor in the way this goes down.
Yeah.
We think Smerin believes his 8 is never good when Timofeyev bets this size, and this sizing is indicative of a hand just like Timofeyev has. Maybe not Jack 7, but some sort of one pair hand on this scary board that's trying to get thin value from an 8 or a 9. And Smerin decides, okay, this isn't even good enough to bluff catch, but I can rep really strong hands because I don't believe Timofeyev ever has a flush.
I actually disagree a little bit with that. I don't necessarily know that Smerin thinks my 8 is never good, but sometimes it's not good, right? Sometimes I could call and win, but I could also, if I move in here, win a lot more of the time because I fold out so much more of this marginal value range that is beating me, the jacks of the world.
Right. So there's a couple questions we have to ask as Smerin. First question is, would Timofeyev play overpairs like this?
Right.
Because if he would, this play makes a lot of sense as Smerin, because we're saying, your overpair is no good, buddy. Look at this Jack of Clubs. This is one of the most wet cards that could come on the river, and it's all over my range, so guess what? Your aces are no good.
Right.
That's
the story you can try and sell.
Yeah.
But when you're in Timofeyev's seat there, it might smell a little fishy, actually, right? Because wouldn't ultimately Smerin bet his draws on the turn? Almost all of them, maybe not all his club draws, but most of them, the ones that don't have showdown value, like a pair of 9s, a pair of 4s, sure, those hands with clubs will check back. We believe that. But not much else, maybe some ace-high clubs, but we think even most of those may feel obligated to bluff the turn rather than just check back and hope a weak ace-high is good.
Right. If you listen to our podcast, we came up with the combos of clubs that we think are reasonable for Smerin to have, and we came up with 12 combos.
Yeah.
And to be clear, we think he's only repping clubs here. We think Queen 10 or 7-10 are clear bets on the turn because he has no showdown value. That's an opportunity to take the pot. We expect he's betting those all the time. So we think he only has 12 combos of value, but what are the bluffs?
Well, this is the thing. If we're thinking that he's going to bet all his bluffs on the turn anyway, now if we're sitting in, I was going to say Mozgov again,
no, it's Timofeyev.
Timofeyev's seat, like the only bluffs we can really come up with are hands just like Smerin has, which is turning one pair into a bluff. Boy, you have to have really seen this guy do that or know this guy pretty well to be able to call here comfortably, although there is a second factor, which Grant brought up in the beginning, which is the sizing.
The sizing is probably the most important factor in making this call. It's interesting how they leveled each other here, at least in our minds. This is how we perceive it went. Timofeyev bet this somewhat transparent bet. Timofeyev was probably aware of the transparency of the bet, but was not necessarily expecting the above-the-rim shove.
Right.
Then when the shove happens, Timofeyev starts thinking and thinks, really, it could only be clubs, and there aren't really that many types of clubs that you can shove with. I sized it pretty small. It looked kind of like what it is. If you had an 8 or a 9, you probably wouldn't think your hand was good, and maybe you would move in as a bluff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's complex, but that has to kind of be what's going on here.
And you can also balance some of those club value shoves with the ace-queen and ace-10 with the ace of clubs specifically, which might play it just like this.
They might, we're not sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to have that happen. We also have to have the 8s and the 9s decide to turn into bluffs in order to make this call as Timofeyev. We're not sure if it's a good call actually over time. In this result, we can see that Smerin definitely has that play in him, and he is the chip leader, or at least very close to the chip leader, so it's likely Smerin's been running over the table and making plays that are kind of crazy like this. That might make it easier for Timofeyev to assume there are more bluffs there. It just has to be the type of hand where it's a showdownable hand that turns into a bluff, which is pretty whack.
It is pretty whack because the showdownable hand could reasonably just call here for this price, which is, of course, what Timofeyev was looking to have happen.
Yeah, he would have loved that.
Although it worked out even better. I love this play by Smerin, ultimately.
It's a really cool play.
Beautiful.
Although, here's the problem in the end.
He's not repping much.
It's hard to rep the clubs.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't matter because you're putting the other guy's tournament on the line, and the other guy doesn't really have clubs ever. So, good luck, buddy. Call if you want.
Right. It's like, it's not my problem I can't rep clubs. You don't have clubs. That's all that matters between the two of us right now. So, weigh-in, people. Was that a great play by both players on the river? Questionable by both, or just terrible somewhere? Let us know in the comments and what you thought about our analysis as well. We're going to respond to our favorite comments right up here. If there's nothing to click on, it's coming soon.
Well, just so you guys know where we fall on the spectrum as to where those players were in terms of skill on the river, we're going to point you to our Elite Plays playlist over here. If you want to see a bunch of really good, really cool plays, click on up there.
And if you have a suggestion for the breakdown, you want us to break down a particular hand, tweet it at us. We are, of course, at 2PokerGuys, and send a YouTube link. You got to include a timestamped YouTube link, otherwise we will not do it.
Also, don't forget, we have a podcast. We talked about this thing for a long time, 47 minutes, I believe. Check it out. It's on the screen right here. If you don't think we went into enough detail, this podcast is for you.
Indeed. And of course, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.